Hello, and welcome to our Q&A webinar today with Sauce Labs and Backtrace. My name is Melissa Boggs. I'm the VP of Business Agility at Sauce Labs, and it is my honor to be your host for the next hour. So with that, let me introduce you to Matt and Abel. Matt Wyman, innovative, solutions-focused product leader, 20 years of experience driving new technologies, currently serving as the Chief Product and Growth Officer at Sauce Labs. Hey Matt,
Hello.
welcome.
Thank you.
Abel's career began as a kernel module developer, to team lead, to head of engineering, and now he shares his talents with us at Sauce Labs as the co-founder and CEO of Backtrace. Now, I want to share a little bit about Sauce Labs and Backtrace as we get into this. At Sauce Labs, our mission is being committed to building a world of digital confidence. Interestingly, Backtrace creates the solutions that orgs need to have the best user experience by delivering the highest software quality. So now together, we are able to enable organizations to shift both left and right as part of an end-to-end testing strategy that's optimized for the DevOps era. That was a lot of words, Matt and Abel.
That's a lot.
Abel, can you start by just walking us through Backtrace? Tell us all about Backtrace.
Yeah, definitely. So Backtrace is a solution considered part of the error reporting family of solutions out there. Error reporting is a really interesting set of solutions because the industry already had logging, right? It already had a lot of things like APM. So why did error reporting come about? Well, oftentimes with apps, whether they be Django apps, which was a popular type of app, or framework, I should say, used with apps, native applications, so like native mobile applications or the like, it's often the case that the errors that were emitted from these applications weren't fully captured by the log frameworks themselves, right? Often with logging, you have to know what to log before the error actually happens. That also includes not only the event of the error, but also the data associated with it. You know, when I remember writing log messages in my code, sometimes I would forget this crucial data point. And it would always be the most painful thing because then you're like, oh, I have to wait for this error to happen again. Error reporting was really fundamentally about that. So first, can we capture all of the errors that happen within the application by leveraging the framework, the runtime, the game engine, even the system itself? Additionally, can we standardize the set of data that's captured at the time of the error? That way, I can get an expansive set of information when I'm looking and trying to resolve that issue. Of course, with all product, genres, so to speak, you start off with one idea and one set of things you need to solve, and it quickly expands. So with error reporting, and specifically with Backtrace, once you have the errors, what you want to do is be able to intelligently aggregate them, because you might see 1,000, a million of the same error. So you can do this by call stack. You can maybe even do it by some of the context you capture, like which platform is it happening. In addition to this kind of aggregation, you also want to be able to potentially correlate it with other events. So for example, a new release that happened, or hey, I just opened up the APAC region, and so this caused a brand new set of inputs, potentially a new set of errors as well. So intelligent aggregation and correlation kind of was the next facet of the error reporting solutions. I think the last thing, and something we recognized very specifically I shouldn't say specifically, but very intimately at Backtrace is that the error was never the end. It was actually just the beginning of the journey for debugging, right? The error was, I'd immediately look at the error and I'd want to look at the code. I'd want to look at the Jira ticket associated with it. So it was all about the third facet of error reporting is augmenting and automating the workflow around error resolution. That's what we do at Backtrace. That's what we've been doing. Today we have a focus across applications as well as games, often with the complex environments that they have and the performance requirements. Error reporting becomes even of a higher importance because sometimes you may not see the types of errors that you would see during testing. Finally, you'd see it when people are actually playing the game as well.
Sounds like it gives you a lot of insight beyond the error message itself. Like it kind of sends you into another world.
That's definitely the goal, right? The phrase, which is, I'm not sure how much I'll keep using it, but decreasing reproducibility, right? Reducing the need to reproduce. That was a big goal of error reporting. Give as much context as possible, because as a developer, I do not want to spend my time trying to reproduce the issue.
And so many things just disappear in the overall development cycle when it's been found, it's been reported, but there aren't enough examples of it, or it's hard to pin down the similarities. And so although there may be a person who's identifying that there's an issue, either in production or pre-production, the developer doesn't really have a method to go figure it out, right? So that linkage is really critical coming back to the workflow.
Hearing that phrase, it works on my machine.
Yeah.
Right?
Exactly, yeah.
So quickly, Abel, how easy is it to add Backtrace? Like how easy is it to sign up and get in there?
Yeah, for sure. I'd mentioned, agent-based solutions like APM, logging, where you have kind of this added instrumentation. Error reporting, or the types of like Backtrace, is very much of the in-app type instrumentation. So you integrate an SDK. Once you integrate this SDK, you take care one line for initialization, and then additional lines for adding additional context. So maybe custom context that you want to add. Such things as like, maybe for example, you want to add the config file that your app was launched with as well. Again, having a single consolidated solution to have as much context as possible. It usually takes on the order of minutes, and then depending on how complex or how rich the information you want, obviously that can expand to your heart's content there. Once you have the SDK, you're pointing it to a Backtrace instance, then it just begins to start collecting all of this information. It's an information sink, or an error sink, so to speak. With that there, you log in and you can begin to see the errors that are emitted from the SDK, whether that be in production, which is often what is associated with Backtrace, but the SDK is in the code. So if your application's emitting errors in testing, it actually will collect those errors. If it's early access or pre-release, let's say you're only doing this on 10% of your users, the SDK doesn't care. It's still collecting this information.
So earlier we talked about end-to-end testing strategy.
Sure.
So now that we know a little bit about Backtrace, why was this so important, Matt?
Well, it's interesting, actually, Abel just hit on it just there. There were these moments in time that people thought about staging or UAT or development. There are these formal bounded environments. And there's still a place for integration testing, but these boundaries are breaking down. We're seeing much more fluidity from the moment a person writes code all the way through to when it's available in production. And even all those feature flags and all the canaries, all these mechanisms are essentially management of risk, confidence testing directly in production. You mentioned previews. That's a type of testing, right? So it's not available to everyone, but it's available to some set. Why? Because there are exit criteria. You're trying to figure out, well, is this going to work the way I expect it to? Are there unexpected situations? In the gaming industry, we were talking about this earlier. Just the bar is really high. The expectations are extremely high. And a lot of those learnings can be brought into other types of applications. So when you come back, why is it so important? Well, we had this amazing moment. We started talking early and we realized we had the same view of the world, but we were looking at it from opposite sides of sort of a very interesting arc, if you will. We were imagining the world starting with automation and testing and what happens at the moment you write code. How do you validate what you wrote so that you increase confidence all the way through your life cycle? And maybe we should talk about coverage as well, because there's this interesting byplay between coverage and confidence. All the way through to production, you were there in production saying, oh my goodness, we're getting hammered by these errors. How do we go upstream? How do we figure out the root cause of this error? How do we get it back to the developer at the right moment in time? So it was this beautiful fit of trying to solve the same problem, but bringing in two different, if you will, base assumptions, but with a similar set of personas, a similar set of people, similar workflows. And so it really fit well together. I think it really opens up a new set of possibilities, especially as we start looking at, hopefully get into this a little later, but as we start looking at the combination of different types of signals around testing and around quality and confidence overall.
Yeah, and I'd echo what Matt said, because what we were seeing from our users was that it's a very difficult journey for them to replicate production or the actual release in their testing environments. And quite frankly, even me as a developer, I didn't really trust my code until it was out in production. And so we continued to see people do this type of release where they would expose it to some smaller level of their users or their production server base. But it was the tying back that became really hard, and really more difficult. That, quite honestly, if you see an error, right, in production from something like a Backtrace, there should be some mechanism, there should be some ability to be able to expand your testing as well, so that that doesn't happen in the future. And what we continued to see is that it was actually the job of the practitioners, whether that be the estet or the engineer, to actually make that additional test cases. And we just thought that shouldn't be the case. There's got to be a better solution out there. At the very least, there's got to be a sense where you can combine these systems, because there is just this hop that you have to jump over continuously.
We've talked a lot within the Sauce Labs about intent-based testing and behavior-based. And I worked with this amazing product architect at one point who called it the known good set problem. You don't really know what's in production, not really. And if you're moving with a large enough system, the changes are happening fast enough, especially if you have fully committed to CI and CD. Every few minutes, something's changing in production. So what's the known good set? How do you know that exact set is in fact working well together? How do you get that information back? Well, you can have an ephemeral environment that you bring up, you test different combinations, but suddenly you have an N by M problem. That's to say, it's the number of permutations that just expands dramatically. So when you come all the way back, how do we know that it's going to work? Well, you have to tie these things together. And that means tying intent, which is, this is what I expect to happen. So you write your automation tests, you do so around API, you do so around your functional user interface testing, but you also have to watch what's the customer behavior, what's the system behavior. You have to pick up the behavioral side of it as well. And I think that's where error reporting and error debugging actually come into play. That's the behavioral side. And then you link that to the intent-based and you make sure, okay, I intended this. Now what actually happened? Can I map the two together?
What I think is interesting too is, you kind of alluded to it before, but we're kind of bringing together two different communities in a way, right? So you have the gaming community that was a very big customer of Backtrace, and then the development and QA community for Sauce Labs. And now there's some overlap, there's some synergy. What do you see as the ways in which these communities can learn from one another, and or share some things in the products?
Wow, there's a lot there. And I'd even actually add that there's a third community that is not obvious from this, but we are bringing together, which is more around sort of the product management. Keep those two words separate: product and management, because you start to link into business value. So you look at a game, or you look at a website or a mobile app. If there are issues and errors, you're going to get fall off in engagement, right? You're going to have problems on that side. And if you look purely at the features that are being built, then traditionally that's within sort of this quality model, but ultimately you don't really know if it's going to perform. I think part of what we're seeking to do, and we've made a number of acquisitions recently, is to really expand the breadth of what it means to do testing. So the testing's not just, I have a particular scripted test, Selenium, Cypress, Test Cafe, whatever you wrote it in. It's not just about having that one test. It's about trying to minimize the amount of time you're spending to gain confidence, to reduce risk, really. And so I think part of what we're trying to see, we're seeing happen amongst these different communities, QA, QE, SDETs, developers of all different types, is that people are coming together and recognizing, if they're going to move as fast as we need to move, especially in a continuous manner, then we have to change how we're thinking about literally the units, the packets that we're moving through the system at any one moment. And we need to start to bundle them, if you will, with these sort of, I'll call them like lean quality metrics, where you're trying to get this small, clear signal that yes, you can proceed, yes, everything's fine. And if it isn't, you can pull it, you can rewind it quickly and figure out where you have issues. I think these two communities are trying to have that conversation. And when I say starting, I'm not starting right this minute. It's actually been happening for a few years now, with feature flags and canaries and whatnot. But I think it's really now starting to pick up steam, and DevOps is shifting as a part of this.
Yeah, so I have the one example I tend to use in my head when I think about this is, first and foremost, we might be bringing people together, but quite frankly, the development processes and actually developing these apps have brought them together already. Because at the end of the day, you had mentioned I, at some point, led an engineering team, and my main job was I have to make sure I reduce risk before I push out an app. And I've got to minimize latency as well. So I've got to get the app out as soon as I can, right? Because people are waiting on the features and the like. And Matt, you've mentioned this, and actually those two things were inspired by a lot of what you just said as well, is because those were the main two metrics I think about. And the example I always think about is, as well, because I would bake in production, I would actually gate my release based off of the results of automated testing, but I wouldn't necessarily gate my full, like the release after production. I would just do a rollback. But it'd always be this kind of human test, this human decision I'd have to make. It wasn't automated. There wasn't a single view that I could actually say, well, actually, these are the KPIs I associate with risk once you got past that production stage. So one of the things I was really excited about when we started this conversation, not just about bringing these people together, because quite frankly, they were already being brought together, but someone actually recognizing that and saying, well, there has to be something out there that actually gives these people a common language, a product, a view, analytics that we're talking about now that finally addresses a lot of the problems that, quite frankly, weren't being named before.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's the fun journey in front of us, right? To start to bring collaboration together, bring the data together, provide the analytics, and help people move through this quickly. I think also there's been, as people commit more to continuous delivery. I know I'm dating myself here, but way back when, I can't tell you how many meetings I sat in where someone would say, well, we had a 90x% pass on our testing, therefore we should go. I said, well, wait a moment. First of all, it wasn't 100. And second, we don't exactly know where it is. It's a human process, and that's not going to be acceptable. Not the way the world's changing, not the kind of speeds we need to move. But you also can't just build a system that's purely binary, right? It can't just be a on-off that you ran 100%, therefore you can move forward, because there are many conditions in which some risk may be acceptable, right? You might allow some risk because your blast radius, your exposure is so limited that that's an acceptable type of risk. Whether it's a game, a website, or a mobile app, there are areas, there are journeys that are less important than other journeys. You're not going to go break your e-commerce checkout flow, but you might change your T's and C's. You might try something out there, which is, you're still displaying it, but if there's a CSS issue, that's okay. So all these variables, if you will, we need to have systems that can represent those variables and present them back to people so you can look at them and set them up. And I think this is the journey that we're now embarking on together, right? In pulling these different signals together.
I would be remiss as an Agilist if I didn't mention that what I hear is breaking down silos, breaking down handoffs, and more fluidity and, dare I say, agility, in connection to our customer, getting there faster.
And I think some of it's and I liked your comment earlier about it's already happened, right? Most organizations are trying to be agile in as many facets as they can be. It means something different for everyone. So not to say there's one method, but it's already happening, but not everyone's getting supported. And that's the other side of it, and that's what we're trying to do here.
I love that. Before we move on to live questions from our audience, is there anything additional that we didn't cover about Backtrace and Sauce Labs that you want to share?
I'm sure there's a ton of things we didn't cover.
Well, so just to start off, so first, this marriage, so to speak, this combination of our two companies really. First, I'd like to say it really emphasizes that error reporting is a thing. A lot of people may not know about it. So I definitely would encourage people, go to backtrace.io/create, look at Backtrace, see how it can help you. Because either your app's in testing and you're emitting errors, or even in production, you want that kind of visibility. I think the second thing is that you should stay in tune for everything that Sauce Labs and Backtrace is doing, because we really do have not only a big vision, but this idea of incrementally helping, naming, and actually supporting this conversation that's already happening with these communities of developers, QAs, SDETs, etc.
People may be surprised that we reached over into sort of a different sector, if you will, into gaming. But there's actually a very specific reason for that. As we learned more about the gaming industry and the kind of software that's being written in the gaming industry and the size of the industry, the pace at which it's moving, one of the things that really caught our attention was just the high bar that game companies have for quality. It is not acceptable to have a failure. The impact is immediate and devastating for some of these games, especially when people only look at a game for a few minutes. Potentially, they're either sucked in and they love it, or they gain a negative impression and they're out. People are spending huge amounts of time in these environments, and so just as a technology, the kind of technology you've had to build is really staggering. It's really amazing. The quantity of data, the amount of information you're providing, you're never letting an error drop on the floor, the kind of accountability you're being held to and you're enabling really attracted us to making this move. We'd love to see that brought into web, into mobile, into other areas. We think it's a new way of thinking in areas that may not have had a chance to see it, because I think gaming has lived in its own bubble in many respects. Some of that has to do with the devices, but some of it just has to do with the different sectors, different visions of the world, and how people move forward. So we're really excited to also see that come together, and I think the applicability is immediate. So I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. First of all, like the support and like the usage from gaming has been awesome. It's been powerful of Backtrace, but it's near and dear to my heart, not only because I'm a gamer, but also because you're absolutely right. It's an environment that presents itself where you have the utmost performance requirements, where user retention means millions, if not billions of dollars. And quite frankly, you don't have a second chance with gamers. And so pushing out applications, pushing out software, which was ultimately these really interactive and engaging games, you just didn't have this, you didn't have the realm of errors in front of you so that you can make sure that you had a successful game. I mean, and the amount of games that I can like state, right, I'm not going to call any names, that ultimately that didn't succeed because of the errors that they saw. What's really powerful about that, as you said, the fidelity of information that we capture, the volume of information that we are able to retain, and giving that as a tool ultimately to the people that are trying to deliver the best experience, can apply to mobile and web. Not only
you have people doing that already, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's not even as though it's a theoretical. You have folks utilizing Backtrace across different environments.
That's absolutely right. That shift is, or I should say, the melding of the two have already happened. When you have native applications, when you have immersive experiences in your e-commerce app, in your music app, and the like. So we're really excited not only because we can continue to dedicate ourselves to the gaming industry and supporting and servicing the needs of that industry, but also being able to apply the lessons we learned to the areas where you all are so strong as well.
Now we are all so strong
That's
together.
right. Together.
It's going to take some time. You know,
Right.
it's fresh. give me some time.
So you mentioned data earlier, Matt, and I want to get into that a little bit because a couple of the pre-submitted questions kind of surrounded data. So first, Abel, talk a little bit about like these fast systems with huge quantities of data and how Backtrace can help with that.
Absolutely. So going back to the gaming industry and that experience, you want your game to run at least at 60 frames per second. That already puts a benchmark against the overhead that you can introduce in your application. It's what I call latency jitter. The amount of latency, the jitter that you can introduce is very, very low. That acceptance, that envelope that you can, that is acceptable.
And what does that look like? If it was introduced, what would the experience be?
You'd see staggered gameplay. You'd see like lag. Is a lot of people, like, even though that might be associated with networking, but it's like the stuttering of the game, etc., which you just can't have happen.
People are having millisecond reactions.
Exactly.
What's happening on screen with one another.
Yeah. So that performance requirement and the performance of the application speaks to what we were able to create at Backtrace to be able to fit within that operating realm and still be able to provide the introspection that we were. I think the second thing is that these games have tens of millions of players, which means you have tens of millions of these games running at any given point in time. And they may be emitting thousands of errors, per minute, if not more. So just do the math, right? You're talking about millions of errors at any given point in time, even within a single day. What's really important for us and the way we engineered our systems at Backtrace is that we thought every data point was critical. So we wanted to make sure that we did not unless the customer needed it, we didn't have to necessarily introduce sampling, right? Something that was really important to us. Again, it's the wealth of data that you can get, because in games, especially with those complex environments, higher volume, but also really complex bugs that can happen. You're talking about, like, it boggles my mind, some of the systems that these game developers create. They're fascinating, they're magnificent, but they're also really complex to debug. So you need as much information as possible so that you can understand how the interaction of the game may have caused this actual execution loop to happen to actually debug it. That speaks really close to my heart, because that's what I like. I love low-level systems. I love high-performance systems. And so when I saw this type of work at hand, I said, I would love to build a product that's useful to them.
Yeah, I also cut my teeth, like you, cut my teeth as an engineer for many years. One thing I would love to have had is something you've built, which is once there are a set of issues or errors in the system, you actually have built a mechanism where you can pivot on different criteria and essentially search your realm of errors and your stacks to see what's happened. And you've built a really rapid response, so you can quickly go through and figure out if there are other errors like this error by honing in on a particular set of queries, if you will, against the errors. Maybe you could speak to that a little bit, that experience of what it's like to actually debug.
Yeah, so when you have a higher volume of data, obviously the flexibility of your queries or the ability to investigate is really important. Yeah. So whether that be creating different keys by which I can pivot, or actually index on the data, that's important, because the way I prioritize my errors may not be actually frequency of occurrence. It may be the number of gamers, the number of users that are being impacted. Or actually, I might be the software developer who's responsible for a submodule. So I actually want to filter or key on actually a submodule or an actual line of code or actual function. All of this is really important, because there's two potential scenarios. First is a scenario I like to call Heisenbugs, which is it's this bug that it's elusive. It's not happening in your development environment. It only happens every once in a while in production. And what you need is the ability to identify those Heisenbugs and see them actually all in one place to identify the pattern. That's one really key aspect there. And so having all of this data in one place and having the flexibility of our system is really important to identify those patterns and trends. The second type of bug, the second type of bug that's very interesting is the type of bug that actually has inter-system dependencies. So like the complexity is actually introduced not because of a single module, but also because it's actually some bug in some library that only happens every once in a while. Or you could, obviously distributed systems, you can scope that out a little bit. It actually is the interaction between different services, et cetera. Right. That's where having all the data is very important, having all of the events in a single system, and that ability to pivot and query against any dimension of the data becomes super important to the developer's process towards resolution.
One thing I'm excited about is the potential to take that, spread it out across all the different environments that a developer is working in, pre-production all the way through, and to figure out, I like that Heisenbug, if it's a Heisenbug in production, were there some instances of it elsewhere? Can we actually trace it somewhere else? Can I get ahead of those? We experimented with something called failure analysis, which is doing AI/ML on output, log output, to see common patterns and aggregate patterns. And I can, you're solving a very similar problem from a different angle. I think it's incredibly useful to people as you're trying to investigate what's going on. But also it speaks to the kind of debugging experience. And the other, not to overplay, but the other piece is it's not just developers. One of my hopes, not probably realized yet, but one of my hopes is to make some of that available to other folks, so they can do at least a little bit of the investigation ahead of when it goes to the developer, or somehow we can automate and pull that collaboration together. So as things are found, you can start to link, like, oh, I see an issue in this UI test. Does it also show up in Backtrace? Can I package it all together? And we can sort of put it in the center of the table, if you will, and then all look at the different facets of it.
So I just have to mention how much Abel lit up, starting with the phrase complex bug. Like, I love that. You're in the right place when you light up when you're talking about, the things that you're solving for. So a lot of talk about data. One of our pre-submitted questions, I'm just going to read it to you directly because I think we touched on it a little bit, not entirely. How does Backtrace maintain data confidentiality and support compliance use cases in production?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, we give the control to the user and developer. Because it's an SDK, you actually have the ability to control what data is submitted. We also have the ability to, we give you the ability to scrape any necessary data as well. So for example, you may internally within the app need to scrub certain types of PII and the like. You're able to do that both client side as well as server side. So while we're receiving the information, we can push the data through scrubbers. These scrubbers are pre-configured, so naturally we'll scrub things that look like a credit card number, potentially an IP address and the like. Additionally, you can configure your own scrubbers based off of regular expressions as well. It's really important for us to empower the folks that use our application because they know the data their best. Additionally, we are GDPR compliant and we go through all of the various things that you need to do to be able to make sure that not only do we store the data in the proper place, but we give users the ability to request and delete that data on demand as well.
Security is near and dear to all of us at Sauce Labs. We're SOC 2 Type 2 compliant in the core systems, and of course we'll look to extend that appropriately. But it's table stakes. It's mandatory. And so it was one of the things that we were really happy about was it's something that you'd already thought through or thinking about. So it made this much easier to move forward together.
So we can all be reassured there's no need for data jitters then.
Get jittery about data, but not data jitters.
Right. So I'm curious, I know we've already been talking to customers a bit. Are there any customer stories, no names of course, but customer stories that we can share about just the interest that you're starting to see into what this partnership, what this new world looks like with Sauce Labs at Backtrace? So
maybe I'll just jump in. During due diligence, we had conversations with a number of different organizations, and then post, we've had conversations. Let's just say there are many organizations very interested in pulling together and enabling sort of more of their development processes to understand the errors that are actually occurring, especially on really large organizations with lots of teams that are all really contributing to the same environment. That complexity issue really resonates. And I think, this is one of those, I believe this is just going to be de rigueur. This is just going to be standard. Everyone's going to bring in error reporting and trace it back. And everyone's just like everyone runs automation. And they're all types of signals that should exist. As we go and talk to various customers, there have been some specific examples where they don't have anything in place, don't have visibility in production, don't know what's going on, need a way to debug, and especially wanted to be able to see that linked back to a common system where they can go to one place, whether they're using Jira or some other ticketing system, they can have all their ticketing, all their collaboration in one place, they can get all their signals in one place, get everyone collaborating in one place. So definitely we saw some early resonance there. I'm looking forward to actually getting to market together and starting to build our first features together and whatnot.
Yeah, and I think from our side, from the gaming industry, the customers we've talked to have shown quite a bit of excitement. Primarily because testing within gaming is a very complicated landscape. It could be everything from human play testers to the use of AI to be able to test. But one thing is clear is that what they'd like to be able to do is improve their coverage, but also improve their quality as well. And so in talking to customers about the combination, they're excited about the idea of even the basic stuff of having a device cloud, right? And being able to just deploy the game across a multitude of devices because quite frankly, their gamers are using devices across the plethora of choice that's out there. Additionally, finally being able to tie some of the issues that they see within testing through this automated testing and actually applying automated testing techniques with all the stuff that they're seeing within production, early access and the like, giving everyone from the software technical lead to the producer of the game finally that visibility. Because in game development shops, what we found is that they often tie this data to user retention metrics, user engagement metrics, because it ultimately ends up being a conversation about, am I retaining my gamers? And so they're excited about, again, this idea of consolidating the data and then finally being able to tie it to a bigger picture for the things that they care about.
Are there any examples of where there's cost savings from this as a result of Backtrace? And also to you, Matt, like putting these all together, are there cost savings out of that too?
Yeah, so I'll start off with Backtrace. We've got plenty of case studies out there, but two metrics that really matter are mean time to detection. So when an issue actually happens, how long does it take you to detect that issue, to know about that issue? And I should say error here to be specific. There's also mean time to resolution. So once you know about the error, how long does it take you until there's some semblance of resolving the issue? And I say semblance here because as a developer, as we know, you think you may have solved it, but when do you stop seeing the issue, essentially? So we've had customers where they tell us mean time to detection has dropped over 90%, because that's our system's real time and we don't drop data. So the second the error happens, it's reported back to the Backtrace system. You're talking on the order of ignoring network latency and the like. You're talking on the order of tens of milliseconds, hundreds of milliseconds. That's near real time for these folks. A far better feedback loop latency than what they're used to. So mean time to detection dropping by 90%. And we've had similar customers tell us that mean time to resolution has dropped by 50%. And there's actually two core facets of that. The first is quite honestly, it's because the resolution time actually dropped. And that's because you actually can see all of the errors in one place. You get the historical context. But also it's because you can actually measure mean time to resolution with products like Backtrace. You can actually finally see, oh, this is when I first started seeing it. This is how long until I stopped seeing it in production.
The goal here across all these mechanisms and bringing them together is to reduce the time it takes to get that first feedback, to find out that there is an issue. And sometimes you have to wait till it hits production, but you want to get signal earlier, but you need to do so as fast as possible. And so the ultimate goal, we believe, is to make the pipeline run more quickly and more smoothly. So it's that cycle time. If it was taking you 4 days to get something through, can you get it down to 3 days, 2 days, 1 day? Assuming that you're still putting the same chunk size through. And that's why we're looking at distributing some of the different types of tests. I think a lot of people have relied on large test suites, large functional test suites. I'd like to see that break up and start to see people relying more heavily on API testing to cover some portion of it, and then shift some of the functional testing into functional unit testing, and then functional full integration testing, and then do some risk measurement. Let some of it flow out into your canaries and into your feature flags, because you have the confidence, a safety net. And actually it's funny because when we first started talking, my mental model of Backtrace was as a safety net. Okay, this is the safety net, so if something gets through, it gets caught, it doesn't fall on the floor. And I think the question of, is there a cost savings? I think what we're looking for is a velocity increase, right? A velocity increase then generates more value increases, so then you could argue that you've shifted your cost of goods, if you will, if you want to think of it that way. Not so much to reduce the number of people there, rather it's the other side of it. So let's move more quickly together. Let's get more value out together. I think that's what we're really trying to do. And I do think there's some big shifts that need to happen to fully realize that, especially on large systems. If you're starting from scratch, you can build a lot of these best practices in right from the beginning. If you have a really big, robust piece of software that's been running for some time, you're in a transition, and it's a permanent activity. You're always going to be transitioning into new techniques, new world. And so I think our role, our responsibility is to help bring those techniques forward and give you a smooth transition. So you've got that big test suite, fine. Here's some tools to start understanding how you can break it up. Here's some tools to understand how you can get into your pipelines, move your pipelines faster. Oh, by the way, here's a tool to make sure that nothing falls on the ground. So you have a safety net. And now you can start to reason about how all those pieces move together.
And I also say the more safety net, the more confidence you have, the more willing you might be to take some risks, right? Like calculated, controlled risks, but that's what leads to innovation. That's what takes some of these companies forward ahead of their competitors because they have the confidence to try new things and get customer feedback and make sure it's going to be okay.
Exactly right.
So, yeah. A live question. So, thank you for sending in your live questions. Please keep sending them. We've got some time. So, can Backtrace pull error reporting accurately across many instances of Jenkins at a single organization?
Yes, we can.
I would argue those are actually separate concepts, right? So Jenkins is an environment where you're going to run your builds, you're going to run your pipelines, your CI/CD, and Backtrace is tied into the actual software that's running and can aggregate from any services anywhere. So absolutely yes, and slightly separate elements.
Exactly, right, and that's exactly the point, is that it could be Jenkins, it could be another build system.
Can be both at the same time. That's a realistic use case as people are transitioning and or different teams. You and I were talking about Backtrace, helping tie together, client and server or services that are distributed. If you're running a highly distributed system, these are all standard use cases.
Follow-on question. How does Backtrace error reporting maintain accuracy through continuous changes at the API level?
Interesting. So continuous changes at the API level, my understanding of my experience with this is that you're either introducing potentially some code change, right? And that code change could be corresponding to a version change, or at the very least, it's a git commit, a git hash of some sort of identifier. All of that context is captured with errors with Backtrace. So in fact, if let's say it's actually an API change where the app itself did not change in any way, shape, or form, then things like session ID or a token, right, can be also captured alongside the error, or then that token can actually can allow you to tie it to the potential API change as well.
Nice. So you can link back to the SHA or link directly to the API that's changed. And even if it makes, this part what I find really interesting, it's those pivots again, right? It's the different, you can look at it based on what the commit was, or look at it based on the API version, or based on the service. So,
what makes Backtrace different from other reporting tools on the market?
Great question. So first and foremost, the depth and fidelity of information. So what we capture at every instance of error. This is why we had such great success within the gaming industry, because again, you had an issue of reproducibility, but also because you had massive amounts of gamers playing, the depth of information really was important, so you reduced your need to reproduce. The second is just the performance and the amount of volume of data that we can handle. With games, you did not want to drop a single error. You wanted as much data as possible. And in fact, in many cases, with each of these errors, you wanted to potentially capture even more information than just not only the context that we had talked about, but also specific regions of memory. Because you're such a high performance application, actually being able to inspect memory is super important as well. That's something we prided our system on, not only to be able to capture the frequency, the number of events, but also the depth per event. And no matter if it's a kilobyte to even several megabytes per event, that's something else that was really important. So those are two big things about reporting. The third thing Matt touched on it several times, which is we really, really prided ourselves on the ability to have flexible investigation of data, to be able to query, to pivot, to filter on any attribute of the data. That's something where we differentiate ourselves in the market. It's something that was really important to all of our users, whether it be mobile games and the like, because we deal with sophisticated organizations that not only added a ton of context, but wanted to tie that context to different downstream systems, wanted to build their own reports so that they can see everything from actually crashes per song played. Things of this nature was actually super important to them because these were KPIs that they had in their system. So this is the ways we've differentiated ourselves from the rest.
And you're also dealing with a much broader range of devices and environments, right? It's not just browsers or just mobile. You're having to deal with everything.
Yeah, so we support all major gaming systems, PlayStation, PS4, PS5, Nintendo Switch, Xbox. We also support a number of what the market would refer to as embedded devices. So whether that be home automation, whether that be like an e-ink device, things of that nature, all use Backtrace today. So
It's really exciting. I think there's one more differentiator now, Matt.
What's that?
One more thing that differentiates it from the market is now that
we're all together, Sauce Labs. I wasn't sure where you were going there for a moment. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the putting it all together is something that we were really excited about. I think this is something we were hoping to see happen, and really excited when we met Abel and Sammy, the founders, and to see such shared vision about how the future could play out and how we could work together.
And I don't think you can underestimate the power of shared vision like that, right? Like, one of my questions for you might have also been like, what did you see in them as a company? Because there are other, other companies similar, but Backtrace offers everything that Abel just listed and then some, right? This shared vision.
And that's the journey forward, right? This is not about a moment in time. This is about a very, frankly, opinionated journey that we'd like to take Sauce Labs on and take our customers on and others on in helping us build better products at the end of the day and deliver more quickly. And we were talking about this earlier, this notion of confidence and risk and coverage. And you're going to see us talk a lot about those. Like you and I were having a wonderful conversation earlier today about, well, is it coverage or is it risk? Is it both? Is it confidence? How do we talk about some of these things? And I'm excited to have those conversations, not just within Sauce Labs, but also with the market and with people all over to say, can we think differently about quality, but still maintain very high standards, and in fact, raise the standards as we go forward.
Yeah, and just continue the conversation in the community, as you said, and lead it, essentially. So we just have a few more minutes left. Are there any last remarks that either of you want to share about this journey?
Well, I think everyone should go visit Backtrace. Why don't you tell folks that?
Well, yeah, I'll echo it again, backtrace.io/create. Free to sign up. You can start a trial, integrate the SDK. If you're like me and you love to see the code, just go to our GitHub page, github.com/backtrace-labs. You can see all the SDKs there. And yeah, I'd just try it out. You don't like not only is it low overhead to try it out, the value that you potentially get could be instrumental in your next release.
And give us feedback.
Exactly.
Don't hesitate. We want to hear, we want to talk. So.
Excellent. Any last remarks about the journey, Matt?
It's just been a fantastic experience. Really exciting to be able to do something new like this and do something frankly visionary and get on this new way of working together. So this has been wonderful.
Amazing. Well, thanks to everyone watching. Thanks for your live questions. And most of all, just thanks for being part of the Sauce Labs community. We have a lot in front of us. And as you can tell, everyone here is really excited about it. So with that, have an excellent day.